More on this, we are joined by Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada. Senator, thanks for being here. You are a former state attorney general. You wrote the law to make sex trafficking a crime in Nevada. What do you make of the arguments made by Maxwell?
Well, listen, I think Lisa's right. This is not unusual. What you see are defendants always exercising the right to habeas or post-conviction relief. But here is what people need to understand. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted as a sex trafficker by a jury of her peers. The question I ask is, one, after having a conversation with Donald Trump's attorney, why is she moved from one prison to another and getting special treatment? Why is she claiming now she wants to seek a commutation from Donald Trump of her sentence? I mean, it's just outrageous. And more importantly, and this is why the work that I did around sex trafficking, this is about the victims. How do we make sure we're doing right by them, help them become survivors, but get all this information out there? That's why I support it, and that's why you see Congress demanding the files from this investigation. This is partly about these victims who are entitled to know the truth. Who was involved? It wasn't just Ghislaine Maxwell. It wasn't just Epstein. Who else was involved in the sex trafficking of these victims? They are entitled to know this.
So tomorrow is that deadline for the DOJ to make all the Epstein files public.
Tomorrow's the deadline.
What will you be looking for in this
Tomorrow's
release?
the deadline. Well, I can tell you what. First, and most importantly, let's see if the Trump administration's DOJ actually releases the files. I'm hoping they do. They should follow the law, but we have seen in the past where this DOJ has not even followed the law and makes excuses why they're not going to follow a judge's order. They need to. They need to follow the law in this case. We need to see those documents. And I will tell you, I think many of us are waiting to see when the documents are released to have the opportunity to go through them. What's being redacted, what isn't, what information is there. And again, Anna, it just goes back to this idea of transparency and accountability. Allegedly, this investigation is over. Those documents should be released when an investigation is closed. The victims are demanding it. We are demanding it. We want to know the truth behind this. And I think the American public is entitled to this as well.
What happens if they don't make that deadline tomorrow? And how will you know that everything is there?
Well, first of all, if they don't make the deadline, then they're violating the judge's order, and they should be held accountable and in contempt. And this will go back to court, I would assume, and the DOJ is going to have to explain to the judge why they're not releasing court-ordered documents. I think that's the most important thing. After we get the documents, we'll have a conversation. I think many of us want to see what's in them, what isn't in them, how will we know? We need to have an opportunity to look at the documents first. But the first step is to make sure that this DOJ follows the law and follows that court's order, but most importantly, follows the law of the order of, in general, of members of Congress. We passed legislation. Let's get this done. We want to see this. And if they're not going to release the documents, I think Congress has an oversight role here. We should be pulling folks in and demanding from DOJ, why are they not following the law?
We do know that the House Oversight Committee has been doing its own investigation, and they've managed to get their hands on a trove of different types of records, particularly from the Epstein estate. As a member yourself of the Senate Banking Committee, I know you've called for a hearing to dig into the ties between Epstein and U.S. financial institutions like J.P. Morgan Chase and other banks. What information would you like to get from these banks?
Let's step back for a minute, Anna, and let me just make sure the American public knows what you talked about, that House oversight and the work that Congress is doing in this issue is bipartisan. I think people need to understand this. This is not a partisan issue. This is bipartisan. We are demanding this information. I also know, as a former prosecutor, you follow the money. You follow the money trail of who was involved. That will help tell us who is involved in this sex trafficking scheme of these individual victims, who was involved in the larger scale pattern of what was happening here in this scheme. Are there other people that actually should be held accountable that are not, because DOJ is not following through in any further investigation? I think that's important, not only for the victims to know, but for the American public to know as well. We are talking about sex trafficking. This is the exploitation of children and young adults. This is horrific. This is a horrific crime, and nobody should be enslaved in sex trafficking in this country or any other country. And that's why, for me, working on this issue, even as a former attorney general, and passing legislation to create this crime and going after these perpetrators, but also making sure that we are doing right by their victims. and giving them the information they need, giving them the accountability, but also most importantly, and I think this is why the victims want this, putting them on a pathway to survivorship, moving on beyond this. They are entitled to this information.
But back.
These are the numbers he's up against. A new Quinnipiac University poll finds 57% say President Trump is more responsible for the current economy than former President Biden. Let's get right to CNN's Elena Treen live at the White House this morning for the very latest on what they're saying there. Elena?
Yeah, look, I actually think you pointed out the style of this. That was one of the most striking things to me, John, about the president's speech last night. He very much stayed on script. He was reading the teleprompter. That is not a characteristic for this president. And I mean, that's partly because I think he had 15, 16. This ended up being an 18-minute speech. He only had that amount of time for the television stations to actually take this. But he was rapidly rushing through this, shouting at times, almost trying to convince Americans this is what you need to be feeling right now. But one of the things, of course, when you get to substance, he did use this. This was a speech meant to tick through his accomplishments. He talked about the congressional, as the so-called big, beautiful bill that they passed over the summer, his tax cuts, tariffs that he said, all of this going to help attribute to the economy. And that was really the main focus of this speech. It was very clear what this speech was intended to do, which is to try and get at an issue that has been plaguing this administration and causing a lot of anxieties as they head into 2026, of course, a midterm elections year. He talked about affordability at length, and he really tried to place the blame at the feet of his predecessor, Joe Biden. He blamed him repeatedly, even actually starting to do so in his first sentence. Listen.
11 months ago, I inherited a mess, and I'm fixing it. This is what the Biden administration allowed to happen to our country. Under the Biden administration, car prices rose 22%, and in many states, 30% or more. Under Biden, real wages plummeted by $3,000. Electricity costs surged 30 to 100% under Biden. The worst thing that the Biden administration did to our country is the invasion at the border.
And that was only a few examples of him using Biden's name, John. Look, I mean, the president also made selective use of some of these statistics. In some cases, they were quite misleading statistics. At one point, he tried to argue that inflation is down. It's actually, as of the last numbers we saw, as you mentioned, we're going to see some new numbers today, but it's at the same place we saw it on Inauguration Day when Joe Biden left office. He also tried to argue that employment is headed in the right direction. Well, when he entered office, the president, the unemployment rate was at 4%. The most recent numbers we saw put an unemployment rate at 4.6%. But look, I'll say this, and you could hear it in that clip. He keeps blaming Biden. I have now traveled the country talking to his supporters, the president's supporters, about this. I was in Pennsylvania last week when he delivered that speech that was supposed to be focused on affordability, but kind of weaved all over the place. They tell me that they agree with him, that, yeah, maybe he did inherit a bad economy, but they are losing patience. And at this point in time, they also say, we're starting to see this being an economy that Trump owns. It's no longer going to be a Biden economy. And so it's very clear that they need to get these numbers in a better place as they head into the next year.
Yeah, and needless to say, Daniel Dale, been working overtime overnight. We'll speak to him a little bit about the facts of this speech. Elena Treen at the White House this morning.
We'll rally around one another, and including all of our students. They are as much of Providence as those who have lived here their whole lives. And Mayor, before we run out of time quickly, I know there is only so much you can say about the suspect that is in custody, but the openness of the campus that you just alluded to may have helped the shooter escape the scene of a building that is on a main artery of that campus. Can you share at least where the suspect was found? Was it on campus? Was it somewhere in the city? Somewhere else in the state? So you're right. It is an open campus in that respect. And last night we shared video of an individual that we believe is the shooter. This is on Donald. These sorts of events are on Donald and the wider conservative movement. Of metal protected by our quote-unquote Second Amendment are more important than children. That's what they've said. We got to protect the pieces of metal, right? They did it after the Uvalde and all that. Like, they got up on stage and they did it. Former right-wing podcaster who's no longer with us got up on stage and effectively said the lives are worth sacrificing to the little pieces of metal. Right? That's what they said. And so yes, Donald Trump is connect. He definitely takes blame, a warm day, as regular as, the bus being late, whatever. It happens literally every day in the United States. There's more shooting, like, EM than there are day. I don't know if it happens literally every day, but it happens like 400 times a year. So because it's often, there's more than one in one day. So it happens certainly multiple times a week, every week in the United States. It is as common as basic life events. And Trump is saying it's acceptable. That's what he's effectively saying. It's the price of being an American, according to Republicans, for this to happen to you, to loved ones, to members of your community. And so, yes, they're damn well responsible.